That's Monk. There you go, buddy. All right, see how we can do this here. Carlos Castaneda, The Art of Dreaming. Here we go, a little better there. Chapter 11, The Tenant. There were no more dreaming practices for me, as I was accustomed to having them. The next time I saw Don Juan, he put me under the guidance of two women of his party, Florinda and Zuleika, his two closest cohorts. Their instructions was not at all about the gates of dreaming, but about different ways to use the energy body, and it did not last long enough to be influential. They gave me the impression that they were more interested in checking me out than in teaching me anything. There is nothing else I can teach you about dreaming, Don Juan said when I questioned him about this state of affairs. My time on this earth is up, but Florinda will stay. She's the one who will direct not only you, but all my other apprentices. Will she continue my dreaming practices? I don't know that, and neither does she. It's all up to Spirit, the real player. We are not players ourselves, we are mere pawns in its hands. Following the commands of Spirit, I have to tell you what the fourth gate of dreaming is, although I can't guide you anymore. What's the point of whetting my appetite? I'd rather not know. The Spirit is not leaving that up to me or to you. I have to outline the fourth great gate of dreaming to you, whether I like it or not. Don Juan explained that at the fourth gate of dreaming, the energy body travels to specific, concrete places, and that there are three ways of using the fourth gate. 1. To travel to concrete places in this world. 2. To travel to concrete places out of this world. And 3. To travel to places that exist only in the intent of others. He stated that the last one is the most difficult and dangerous of the three, and was by far the old sorcerer's predilection. What do you want me to do with this knowledge, I asked. Nothing for the moment. File it away until you need it. Do you mean that I can cross the fourth gate by myself without help? Whether or not you can, that is up to the Spirit. He abruptly dropped the subject, but he did not leave me without the sensation that I should try to reach and cross the fourth gate by myself. Don Juan then made one last appointment with me to give me, he said, a sorcerer's send-off, the concluding touch of my dreaming practices. He told me to meet him in the small town in southern Mexico where he and his sorcerer companions live. I arrived there in the late afternoon. Mark, what are you doing? I arrived there in the late afternoon. Don Juan and I sat in the patio of his house on some uncomfortable wicker chairs fitted with thick, oversized pillows. Don Juan laughed and winked at me. The chairs were a gift of one of the women members of his party, and we simply had to sit as if nothing was bothering us, especially him. The chairs had been bought for him in Phoenix, Arizona, and with great difficulty brought into Mexico. Don Juan asked me to read him a poem by Dylan Thomas, which he said had the most pertinent meaning for me at that point in time. I have longed to move away from the hissing of the spent lie and the old terror's continual cry, growing more terrible as the day goes over the hill into the deep sea. I have longed to move away, but am afraid. Some life yet unspent might explode. Out of the old lie burning on the ground and crackling into the air, leave me half blind. Don Juan stood up and said that he was going for a walk in the plaza in the center of town. He asked me to come along. I immediately assumed that the poem had evoked a negative response in him and he needed to dispel it. We reached the square plaza without having to said a word. We walked around it a couple of times, not talking. There were quite a number of people milling around the stores on the streets facing east and the north sides of the park. All the streets around the plaza were unevenly paved. The houses were massive one-story adobe buildings with tiled roofs, whitewashed walls, and blue or brown patio doors. On a side street, a block away from the plaza, the high walls of the enormous colonial church, which looked like a Moorish mosque, loomed ominously over the roof of the only hotel in town. On the south side, there were two restaurants which inexplicably coexisted side by side, doing good business, serving practically the same menu at the same prices. I broke the silence and asked Don Juan whether he also found it odd that both restaurants were just about the same. "Everything is possible in this town," he replied. The way he said it made me feel uneasy. "Why are you so nervous?" he asked with a serious expression. "Do you know something you're not telling me?" "Why am I nervous? That's a laugh. I'm always nervous around you, Don Juan, sometimes more than others." He seemed to be making a serious effort not to laugh. "Narwhals are not really the most friendly beings on earth," he said in a tone of apology. "I learned this the hard way, being pitted against my teacher, the terrible narwhal Julian. His mere presence used to scare the daylights out of me, and when he used to zero in on me, I always thought that my life wasn't worth a plug nickel." "Unquestionably, Don Juan, you have the same effect on me," he laughed openly. No, you are definitely exaggerating. I'm an angel in comparison." "You may be an angel in comparison, except that I don't have the narwhal Julian to compare you with." He laughed for a moment, then he became serious again. "I don't know why, but I definitely feel scared," I explained. "Do you feel you have a reason to be scared?" he asked, and stopped walking to peer at me. His tone of voice and his raised eyebrows gave me the impression he suspected that I knew something I was not revealing to him. He was clearly expecting a disclosure on my part. "Your insistence makes me wonder," I said. "Are you sure you're not the one who has something up his sleeve?" "I do have something up my sleeve," he admitted, and grinned, "but that's not the issue. The issue is that there's something in this town awaiting you, and you don't quite know what it is, or you don't know what it is, but you do know what it is, but you don't dare tell me, or you don't know anything about it at all. What's waiting for me here?" Instead of answering me, Don Juan briskly resumed his walking. We kept going around the plaza in complete silence. We circled quite a few times, looking for a place to sit. Then a group of young women got up from a bench and left. "For years now I have been describing to you the aberrant practices of the sorcerers of ancient Mexico," Don Juan said. He sat as he sat down on the bench and gestured for me to sit by him. With the fever of someone who had never said it before, he began to tell me again what he had told me many times, that those sorcerers, guided by extremely selfish interests, put all their efforts into perfecting practices that pushed them further and further away from sobriety or mental balance, and that they were finally exterminated when their complex edifices of beliefs and practices became so cumbersome that they could no longer support them. The sorcerers of antiquity, of course, lived and proliferated in this area, he said, watching my reaction. Here in this town was built on the actual foundations of one of their towns. Here in this area, the sorcerers of antiquity carried on all their dealings. You know this for a fact, Don Juan? I do, and so will you very soon. My mounting anxiety was forcing me to do something I detested, to focus on myself. Don Juan, sensing my frustration, egged me on. "Do you know okay, very soon you will know whether or not you really like the old sorcerers or like the new ones. You're driving me nuts with all this strange, ominous talk," he protested. Being with Don Juan for 13 years had conditioned me, above everything else, to conceive of panic as something that was just around the corner at all times, ready to be released. Don Juan seemed to facilitate. I noticed his furtive glances in the direction of the church. He was even distracted. There you are. He was even distracted when I talked to him. He was not listening. I had to repeat my question. "Are you waiting for someone?" Monk. Yeah. Yes, I am, he said. Most certainly I am. I was just sensing the surroundings. You caught me in the act of scanning the area with my energy body. What did you sense, Don Juan? My energy body senses that everything in this is in place. The play is on tonight. You are the main protagonist. I am the character actor with the small but meaningful role. I exit in the first act. What in the world are you talking about? He did not answer me. He smiled knowingly. I'm preparing the ground, he said, warming you up, so to speak, hopping on the idea that modern-day sorcerers have learned a hard lesson. They have realized that only if they remain totally detached can they have the energy to be free. Theirs is a peculiar type of detachment, which is born not out of fear or indolence, but out of conviction. Don Juan paused and stood up, stretched his arms in front of him, to his sides and then behind him. Do the same, he advised me. It relaxes the body, and you have to be very relaxed to face what's coming to you tonight. He smiled broadly. Either total detachment or utter indulging is coming to you tonight. It is a choice that every Nagal in my line has to make. He sat down again and took a deep breath. What he had said seemed to have taken all his energy. I think I can understand detachment and indulging, he went on, because I had the privilege of knowing two Nawals, my benefactor, the Nawal Julian, and his benefactor, the Nawal Elias. I witnessed the difference between the two. The Nawal Elias was detached to the point that he could put aside a gift of power. The Nawal Julian was also detached, but not enough to put aside such a gift. Judging by the way you're talking, I said, I would say that you are going to spring some sort of test on me tonight. Is that true? I don't have the power to spring test of any sort on you, but spirit does, he said with a grin, and then added, I am merely its agent. What is the spirit going to do with me, Don Juan? All I can say is that tonight you're going to get a lesson in dreaming, the way lessons in dreaming used to be. But you are not going to get the lesson from me. Someone else is going to be your teacher and guide you tonight. Who is going to be my teacher and guide? A visitor who might be a horrendous surprise to you or no surprise at all. And what's the lesson in dreaming I'm going to get? It's a lesson about the fourth gate of dreaming. And it is in two parts. The first part I'll explain to you presently. The second part nobody can explain to you, because it is something that pertains only to you. All the Nawals of my line got this two-part lesson, but no two of those lessons were alike. They were tailored to fit those Nawals' personal bents of character. Your explanation doesn't help me at all, Don Juan. I'm getting more and more nervous. He remained quiet for a long moment. I was shaken up and fidgety and did not know what else to say without actually nagging. As you already know, for modern-day sorcerers to perceive energy directly is a matter of personal attainment, Don Juan said. We maneuver the assemblage point through self-discipline. For the old sorcerers, the displacement of the assemblage point was a consequence of their subjugation to others, their teachers, who accomplished those displacements through dark operations and gave them to their disciples as gifts of power. It's possible for someone with greater energy than ours to do anything to us, he went on. For example, the Narwhal Julian could have turned me into anything he wanted, a fiend or a saint, but he was an impeccable Narwhal and let me be myself. The old sorcerers were not that impeccable, and by means of their ceaseless efforts to gain control over others, they created a situation of darkness and terror that was passed on from teacher to disciple. He stood up and swept his gaze all around us. As you can see, this town isn't much, he continued, but it is a unique fascination for the warriors of my line. Here lies the source of what we are and the source of what we don't want to be. Since I am at the end of my time, I must pass on to you certain ideas, recount to you certain stories, put you in touch with certain beings right here in this town, exactly as my benefactor did with me. Don Juan said that he was reiterating something I already was familiar with, that whatever he was and everything he knew were a legacy from his teacher, the Narwhal Julian. He in turn inherited everything from his teacher, the Narwhal Elias. the Nawal Elias from the Nawal Rosendo, and he from the Nawal Luan, and the Nawal Luan from the Nawal Sanistaban. I can't say that one. Sanistaban, and the Nawal Sanistaban from the Nawal Sebastian. He told me again in a very formal tone, something he had explained to me many times before, that there were 8 Nawals before the Nawal Sebastian, and that they were quite different. They had a different attitude towards sorcery, a different concept of it, although they were still directly related to the sorcery lineage. We must recollect now and repeat to me everything I've told you about the Nawal Sebastian, he demanded. His request seemed odd to me. I repeated everything I had been told by him or by any of his companions about the Nawal Sebastian and the mythical old sorcerer, the Death Defier, known to them as the Tenant. You know that the Death Defier makes us gifts of power, right, Mark? Every generation, Don Juan said. And the specific nature of those gifts of power is what changed the course of our lineage. He explained that the Tenant, being a sorcerer from the old school, had learned from his teachers all the intricacies of shifting his assemblage point. Since he had perhaps thousands of years of strange life and awareness, ample time to perfect anything, he knew how to teach, how to reach, and hold hundreds, if not thousands of positions of the assemblage point. His gifts were like both maps for shifting the assemblage point to specific spots and manuals on how to immobilize it on any of those positions and thus acquire cohesion. Don Juan was at the peak of his raconteur's form. I had never seen him more dramatic. I had not known him either. I would have sworn that his voice had the deep and worried inflection of someone gripped by fear or preoccupation. His gestures gave me the impression of a good actor portraying nervousness and concern to perfection. Don Juan peered at me, and in the tone and manner of someone making a painful revelation, he said that, for instance, the Nawal Luan received from the Tenant a gift of 50 positions. He shook his head rhythmically, as if he were silently asking me to consider what he had just said. I kept quiet. 50 positions, he exclaimed in wonder. For a gift, one or at the most 2 positions of the assemblage point should be more than adequate. He shrugged his shoulders, gesturing bewilderment. I was told that the Tenant liked the Nawal Luan immensely, he continued. They struck up such a close friendship that they were practically inseparable. I was told that the Nawal Luan and the Tenant used to stroll into the church over there every morning for early Mass. Right here in this town, I asked in total surprise. Right here, he replied. Possibly they sat down on this very spot or another bench over 100 years ago. The Nawal Luan and the Tenant really walked in this plaza? I asked again, unable to overcome my surprise. You bet, he exclaimed. I brought you here tonight because the poem you were reading to me cued me that it was time for you to meet the Tenant. Panic overtook me with the speed of wildfire. I had not breathed through my mouth for a moment. We have been discussing the strange accomplishments of the sorcerers of ancient times, Don Juan continued. But it's always hard when one has to talk exclusively in idealities without any first-hand knowledge. I can repeat to you from now until doomsday something that is crystal clear to me, but impossible for you to understand or believe because you don't have any practical knowledge of it. He stood up and gazed at me from head to toe. Let's go to church, he said. The Tenant likes the church and its surrounding. I'm positive this is the moment to go there. Very few times in the course of my association with Don Juan had I felt such apprehension. I was numb. My entire body trembled when I stood up. My stomach was tied in knots. Yet I followed him without a word when he headed for the church, my knees wobbling and sagging involuntarily every time I took a step. By the time we had walked the short block from the plaza to the limestone steps of the church portico, I was about to faint. Don Juan put his arm around my shoulders to prop me up. "There's the tenant," he said, as casually as if he had just spotted an old friend. I looked in the direction he was pointing and saw a group of 5 women, 3 men at the far end of the portico. My fast and panicked glance did not register anything unusual about those people. I couldn't even tell whether they were going into the church or coming out of it. I noticed that they seemed to be congregated there accidentally. They were not together. By the time Don Juan and I reached the small door cut out in the church's massive wooden portals, 3 women had entered the church. The 3 men and the other 2 women were walking away. I experienced a moment of confusion and looked at Don Juan for directions. He pointed with a movement of his chin to the holy water font. "You must observe the rules and cross yourself," he whispered. "Where's the tenant?" I asked, also in a whisper. Don Juan dipped the tips of his fingers in the basin and made the signs of the cross. With an imperative gesture of the chin, he urged me to do the same. "Was the tenant one of the 3 men who left?" I whispered nearly in his ear. "No," he whispered back. "The tenant is one of the 3 women who stayed, the one in the back now." At that moment, a woman in the back row turned her head toward me, smiled, and nodded at me. I reached the door in one jump and ran out. Don Juan ran after me with incredible agility. He overtook me and held me by the arm. Where are you going?" he asked, his face and body contorted with laughter. He held me firmly by the arm as I took big gulps of air. I was veritably choking. Peals of laughter came out of him like ocean waves. I forcefully pulled away and walked toward the plaza. He followed me. "I never imagined that you were going to get so upset," he said, as new waves of laughter shook his body. Why didn't you tell me that the tenant is a woman? That sorcerer in there is the death defier," he said solemnly. "For such a sorcerer, so versed in the shift of the assemblage point, to be a man or a woman is a matter of choice or convenience. This is the first part of the lesson in dreaming I said you were going to get. And the death defier is the mysterious visitor who's going to guide you through it." He held his sides as laughter made him cough. I was speechless. Then a sudden fury possessed me. I was not mad at Don Juan or myself or anyone in particular. It was a cold fury which made me feel as if my chest and all my neck muscles were going to explode. "Let's go back to the church," I shouted, and I didn't recognize my own voice. Now," he said softly, "you don't have to jump into the fire just like that. Think, deliberate, measure things up, cool that mind of yours. Never in your life have you been put to such a test. You need calmness now." Uh-oh, look who's here. Miss Daisy. There she is. Can you see? Yeah. Go find Monk for me, will you? Okay, you need calmness now. I wanted to get it over with quickly, but Don Juan said that a moment's pause would restore whatever was left of my self-assurance. My knees were about to give out. Solicitously, Don... Oh, wait a minute. Did I just say? Okay. I wanted to get it over with, but Don Juan said that at a moment's pause he would restore whatever was left of my self-assurance. My knees were about to give in. Solicitously, Don Juan made me sit down on the curb. He sat next to me. The first part of the dreaming lesson in question is that maleness and femaleness are not final states, but are the result of a specific act of position of the assemblage point, he said. And this act is naturally a matter of volition in the training. Since it was a subject close to the old sorcerer's heart, they are the only ones who can shed light on it. Perhaps because it was the only rational thing to do, I began to argue with Don Juan. "I can't accept or believe what you are saying," I said. I felt the heat rising in my face. "But you saw the woman," Don Juan retorted. "Do you think that all of this was a trick? Do you know what I think? Do you know what to think? That being in the church, that being in the church is a real woman," he said forcefully. "Why should that be so disturbing to you? The fact that she was born a man attests only to the power of the old sorcerer's machinization. That shouldn't be a surprise to you. You have already embodied all the principles of sorcery. My insides were about to burst with tension. In an accusing tone, Don Juan said that I was being argumentative, with forced patience but with real pomposity. I explained to him the biological foundation of maleness and femaleness. I understand all that, he said, and you're right in what you're saying, but the flaw is to try to make your assessments universal. What we're talking about are basic principles, I shouted. They'll be pertinent to the man here or in any other place they'll be pertinent to a man here or in any other place in the universe. True, true, he said in a quiet voice. Everything you say is true as long as your assemblage point remains on its habitual position. But the moment it is displaced beyond the certain boundaries, and our daily world is no longer in function, none of the principles you cherish has the total value you are talking about. Where's Monk, by the way? Monk! True, true, he said. Okay. Your mistake is to forget that the death fire has transcended those boundaries thousands upon thousands of times. It doesn't take a genius to realize that the Tenant is no longer bound by the same forces that bind you now. I told him that my quarrel, if it could be called a quarrel, was not with him, but with accepting the practical side of sorcery, which up to that moment had been so far-fetched that it had never posed a real problem to me. I reiterated that as a dreamer, it was within my experience to attest that in dreaming anything is possible. I reminded him that he himself had sponsored and cultivated this conviction together with the ultimate necessity of soundness of mind. What he was proposing as the Tenant's case was not sane. It was a subject only for dreaming, certainly not for the daily world. I let him know that to me it was an aberrant and untenable proposition. Why this violent reaction, he asked with a smile. My question caught me off guard. I felt embarrassed. I think it threatens me at the core, I admitted. I mean it. Who the hell is Monk? Monk! Hey, Monk! Monk! That the woman in the church was a man was somehow nauseating to me. A thought played in my mind. Perhaps the Tenant is a transvestite. I queried Don Juan in earnest about this possibility. He laughed so hard that he seemed to get ill. That's too mundane a possibility, he said. Maybe your friends would do such a thing. Your new ones are more resourceful and less masturbatory, I repeat. That being in the church is a woman. It is a she. She has all the organs and attributes of a female, he smiled maliciously. You've always been attracted to women, haven't you? It seems that the situation has been tailored just for you. His mirth was so intense and childlike that it was contagious. We both laughed. He with total abandon, I with total apprehension. I came to a decision then. I stood up and said out loud that I had no desire to deal with the Tenant in any form or shape. My choice was to bypass all his business and go back to Don Juan's house and then home. Don Juan said that my decision was perfectly all right with him, and we started back to his house. My thoughts raced wildly. Am I going to do the right thing? Am I running away out of fear? Of course, I immediately rationalized my decision as right and an unavoidable one. After all, I assured myself, I was not interested in acquisitions, and the Tenant's gifts were like acquiring property. Then doubt and curiosity hit me. There were so many questions I could have asked the death defier. My heart began to pound so intensely, I felt it beating against my stomach. The pounding suddenly changed into the emissary's voice. It broke its promise not to interfere and said that an incredible force was accelerating my heartbeat in order to drive me back to the church. To walk toward Don Juan's house was to walk toward death. I stopped walking and hurriedly confronted Don Juan with the emissary's words. Is this true? I asked. I'm afraid it is, he admitted sheepishly. Why didn't you tell me before, Don Juan? Daisy, go find Monk, will you? Monk! Hey, Monk! I'm afraid it is, he admitted sheepishly. Why didn't you tell me yourself, Don Juan? You going to tell me to die because you think I'm a coward? I asked him in a furious mood. We're not going to die just like that. Your energy body has endless resources. And it had never occurred to me to think you were a coward. I respect your decisions. I didn't give a damn about what your motives were. You are at the end of the road, just like me. So be a true Nawal. Don't be ashamed of what you are. If you were a coward, I think you would have died of fright years ago. But if you were too afraid to meet the death defier, then die rather than face him. There is no shame in that. Let's go back to the church, I said, as calmly as I could. Now we're getting to the crux of the matter, Don Juan exclaimed. But first, let's go back to the park and sit down on the bench and carefully consider your options. You can spare the time, and besides, it's too early for the business at hand. We walked back to the park and immediately found an unoccupied bench and sat down. You have to understand that only you yourself can make the decision to meet or not meet the tenant, or to accept or reject his gifts of power, Don Juan said. But your decision has to be voiced to the woman in the church, face to face and alone. Otherwise, it won't be valid. Don Juan said that the tenant's gifts were extraordinary, but that the price for them was tremendous, and that he himself did not approve of either the gifts or the price. Before you make your real decision, Don Juan continued, you have to know all the details of our transactions with that sorcerer. I'd rather not hear about this anymore, Don Juan, I pleaded. It's your duty to know, and how else are you going to make up your mind? There he is. Come on, Monk. Come here. You can get around her. Come here. Do you think that the less I know about the tenant, the better off I'll be? No, this is not a matter of hiding until the danger is over. This is the moment of truth. Everything you've done and experienced in the sorcerer's world has channeled you to this spot. I don't want to say it because I know your energy body is going to tell you, but there's no way to get out of disappointment, not even by dying. You understand? He shook me by the shoulders. Do you understand? He repeated. Hey, Monk. Yeah. There you go. I shook him by the shoulders. Do you understand? He repeated. I understood so well that I asked him if it would be possible for him to make me change levels of awareness in order to alleviate my fear and discomfort. He nearly made me jump with the explosion of his no. You must face the death defier in coldness and with ultimate premeditation, he went on. And you can't do this by proxy. Don Juan calmly began to repeat everything he had already told me about the death defier. As he talked, I realized that part of my confusion was a result of my use of words. He rendered death defier in Spanish as el desinfante de la muerte, and tenant as el inquilino. I hope I'm not even close to being right, probably. Both of these automatically denote male, but in describing the relationship between the tenant and the narwhals of his line, Don Juan kept on mixing the Spanish language male and female gender denotation, creating a great confusion in me. He said that the tenant was supposed to pay for the energy he took from the narwhals of our lineage, but that whatever he paid was bound to those sorcerers for generations, as payment for the energy taken from all those narwhals. The woman in the church taught them exactly what to do to displace their assemblage point to some specific positions, which she herself had chosen. In other words, she bound every one of those men with a gift of power consisting of a pre-selected specific position of the assemblage point and all its implications. What do you mean by all its implications, Don Juan? I mean by the negative results of those gifts. The woman in the church knows only indulging. There is no frugality, no temperance in that woman. For instance, she's taught the narwhal Julian how to arrange his assemblage point to be, just like her, a woman. teaching this to my benefactor, who was an incurable voluptuary, what is it? And the word I never even heard of, was like giving booze to a drunkard. But isn't it up to each one of us to be responsible for what we do? Yes, indeed. However, some of us have more difficulty than others in being responsible. To augment that difficulty deliberately, as the woman does, is to put too much unnecessary pressure on us. How do you know the woman in the church does this deliberately? She has done it to every one of the narwhals of my line. If we look at ourselves fairly and squarely, we have to admit that the Death Defier has made us, with his gifts, into a line of very indulging, dependent sorcerers. I could not overlook this inconsistency of language usage any longer. I complained to him, you have to speak about that sorcerer as either a male or a female, but not as both, I said harshly. I'm too stiff, and your arbitrary use of gender makes me all the more uneasy. I am very uneasy myself, he confessed, but the truth is that the Death Defier is both male and female. I've never been able to take that sorcerer's change with grace. I was sure you would feel the same way, having seen him as a man first. Don Juan reminded me of a time years before when he took me to meet the Death Defier, and I met a man, a strange Indian, who was not old but not young either, and was very slightly built. I remember mostly his strange accent and his use of one odd metaphor when describing things he allegedly had seen. He said, "Mis ojos se pasaron." Pasarano? My eyes walked on. So he was saying, my eyes walked on. For instance, he said, my eyes walked on the helmets of the Spanish conquerors. The event was so fleeting in my mind that I had always thought the meeting had lasted only a few minutes. Don Juan later told me that I had gone with the Death Defier for a whole day. The reason I was trying to find out from you earlier whether you knew what was going on, Don Juan continued, was because I thought that years ago you had made an appointment with the Death Defier yourself. Miss Daisy, you were giving me undue credit, Don Juan. In this instance, you were giving me undue credit, Don Juan, in this instance. I really don't know whether I am coming or going, but what gave you the idea that I knew? The Death Defier seemed to have taken a liking to you, and that meant that he might have already given you a gift of power, although you don't remember it. Or he might have set you up your appointment with him as a woman. I even suspected she had given you precise directions. Don Juan remarked that the Death Defier, being definitely a creature of ritual habits, always met narwhals of his line first as a man, as it happened to be with the narwhal Sebastian, and subsequently as a woman. Why do you call the Death Defier's gifts of power? Why the mystery, I asked. You yourself can displace your assemblage point to whatever spot you want. Isn't that so? They are called gifts of power because they are products of the specialized knowledge of the sorcerers of antiquity, he said. The mystery about the gifts is that no one on this earth, with the exception of the Death Defier, can give us a sample of that knowledge. And of course, I can displace my assemblage point to whatever spot I want, inside or outside of man's energy shape. But what I can't do, and only the Death Defier can, is to know what to do with my energy body in each one of those spots in order to gain total perception, total cohesion. He explained then that modern-day sorcerers do not know the details of the thousands upon thousands of possible positions of the assemblage point. What do you mean by the details, I asked. Particular ways of treating the energy body in order to maintain the assemblage point on specific positions, he replied. He took himself as an example. He said that the Death Defier's gift of power to him had been the position of the assemblage point of a crow, and that the procedures to manipulate his energy body to get total perception of a crow. Don Juan explained that total perception, that total cohesion, was what the old sorcerers sought at any cost, and that in the case of his own gift of power, total perception came to him by means of a deliberate process he had to learn step by step as one learns to work a very complex machine. Don Juan further explained that most of the shifts of the modern-day sorcerers experience are mild shifts within the thin bundle of energetic luminous filaments inside the luminous egg, a bundle called the bundle of man, or the purely human aspect of the universe's energy. Beyond that band, but still within the luminous egg, lies the realm of the grand shifts, with the assemblage point shifts on to any spots on that area. The perception is still comprehensible to us, but extremely detailed procedures are required for total perception, to be total. The inorganic beings tricked you and Carol Tiggs in your last journey by helping you to get total cohesion on a grand shift, Don Juan said. They displace your assemblage point to the farthest possible spot, then help you perceive there as if you were in your daily world, a nearly impossible thing. To do that type of perceiving, a sorcerer needs pragmatic knowledge or influential friends. Your friends have betrayed you in the end and left you, and your friends would have betrayed you in the end and left you and Carol to fend for yourselves and learn pragmatic measures in order to survive in that world. You two would have ended filled to the brim with pragmatic procedures, just like those most knowledgeable old sorcerers. Every grand shift has different inner workings. What you doing, Monk? Has different inner workings. Which modern sorcerer, almost done here, Monk, okay? Which modern sorcerers, notice he's a wolf, guys, he's part wolf. Look at that face. Monk, look at that face, yeah. Alright. Where's Daisy? Which modern sorcerers could learn if they knew how to fixate the assemblage point long enough at a grand shift. The only sorcerers of ancient times had the specific knowledge required to do this. That's the tenant right there, is Monk. He just came as the dog. Don Juan went on to say that the knowledge of the specific procedures involved in the shifts was not available to the 8 Nawals who preceded the Nawal Sebastian, and that the tenant showed the Nawal Sebastian how to achieve total perception on the 10 new positions of the assemblage point. The Nawal Sanispan, however, received 7, the Nawal Luan 50, the Nawal Ascendo 6, the Nawal Elias 4, the Nawal Julian 16, and he was shown 2. That made for a total of 95 specific positions of the assemblage point that his lineage knew about. He said that if I asked him whether he considered this an advantage to his lineage, he would have to say no, because the weight of those gifts put them closer to the old sorcerer's mood. Now it's your turn to meet the tenant, he continued. Perhaps the gifts he will give you will offset your total balance, and our lineage will plunge into the darkness that finished off the old sorcerers. This is so horribly serious, it's sickening, I said. I most sincerely sympathize with you, he retorted with a serious expression. I know it's no consolation to you if I say that this is the toughest trial of a modern Nawal. To face something so old and mysterious as the tenant is not awe-inspiring but revolting. At least it was to me, and still is. Why do I have to continue with it, Don Juan? Because without knowing it, you accepted the Death Defier's challenge. I drew an acceptance from you in the course of your apprenticeship, in the same manner my teacher drew one from me surreptitiously. I went through the same horror, only a little more brutally than you. He began to chuckle. The Nawal Julian was given to playing horrendous jokes. He told me that there was a very beautiful and passionate widow